All right, guys, welcome to my masterclass on natural muscle growth. So how come natural guys are not growing? So there's a big reason why this occurs, and it's because of PEDs. PEDs, performance enhancing drugs. So PEDs change your program design. Naturals cannot copy enhanced lifters. You have to train within your own natural physiology. Bro, let's keep it real. The fitness industry is full of noise. Every influencer, every YouTuber, every fake natty bodybuilder out there is throwing their secret program at you. But the truth is, most of them, they're enhanced. They're either on peptides, steroids, or they're taking TRT. Performance enhancing drugs change the rules. They're playing an entirely different game than you are. Their tolerance for high amounts of volume isn't like yours. Their recovery isn't like yours. Their hormonal advantage is not like yours. If you're completely natural, it's a slippery slope when trying to replicate what they are doing. You'll work hard, you'll sweat, you'll be sore, but you'll have a hard time growing, or you'll grow a little bit and then plateau. So I'm going to show you exactly how natural muscle growth works and what you need to focus on as a drug-free lifter. And look, I'm not here to give you a 37 exercise chest day or shock the muscle routines. I'm here to give you the framework that works for naturals. So if you're on steroids, peptides, or TRT, this ain't your jam, right? So it's not for you. But if you are entirely drug-free and you want to learn how to do this the drug-free route without drug dependence, then this is for you. Okay? So how do muscles grow? That is the question. So muscle growth, it's not magic, it's not random, it's not confusing the muscle or chasing a pump. Here's how it works simplified, okay? Stimulus. You need to create a specific stimulus in your muscles to incite a response. All right? Then we have recovery. You need time to recover the muscle back to baseline where it was. And then you have adaptation. You need to allow time to adapt. So the body responds by increasing capacities beyond baseline. So an easy way to show you this, you have this. The stimulus is here. You break muscle down. Now you have time to recover, and then you have time to adapt. Okay? So this is the stimulus, this is the recovery, this is adaptation. So you have decompensation, compensation back to baseline, and then overcompensation. When it comes to building muscle, there are a few things that can contribute. But only one thing that actually drives the growth, and that is mechanical tension. Mechanical tension is the primary signal that tells your body to remodel muscle tissue and increase its size and strength. It's the physical force your muscles experience when they are contracting under load. The stretch, the strain, that fight against resistance. That tension activates a chain reaction inside of the muscle cells called mechanotransduction. Mechanotransduction. This is where those mechanical signals get converted into biochemical signals that trigger growth. Now, there are other proposed pathways like metabolic stress and muscle damage, but it doesn't appear that they are the primary cause for muscle growth. Instead, they seem to have a more supportive role. And most everybody would agree with that at this point, 2025. They can possibly help amplify the growth signal, but muscle growth can take place without metabolic stress or muscle damage. So the signal starts with mechanical tension. Without mechanical tension, there's no trigger for the body to adapt. You can chase the burn, you can chase the soreness, but if you're not generating enough tension, you're not stimulating growth. And this is why naturals need to train with greater precision. You're not relying on drugs to help you get those gains. You have to rely on your body's natural ability to recover and subsequently adapt. So that means your training has to be built around maximizing tension, understanding the dose response needed, and then allowing the body to recover and adapt. So this leads us into the hypertrophy stimulus for naturals, which is the Natty hypertrophy pyramid. You like my artwork there? It's great. It's fantastic. Should add a little bit of a forearm definition there. So everything I teach comes back to this pyramid. It's simple, but don't mistake it for easy. If you understand this pyramid and apply it, you can build real muscle naturally, period. And as I've mentioned, everything starts with mechanical tension, and this is how we reverse engineer everything. We start with mechanical tension. When you induce mechanical tension, you send that stimulus to your muscle fibers. Your body responds to that stress, hopefully by repairing and reinforcing those fibers, making them thicker, stronger, and more capable of handling future stress. So this is called adaptation. This is what we want. That's the muscle growth. That stimulus, though, has to be very specific. And this is where most guys screw up. They think fatigue equals stimulus. It doesn't. You can destroy yourself with endless sets and still not trigger growth if the stimulus isn't executed properly. The guys that use drugs, they can induce a weaker stimulus and do endless sets and still make gains because exogenous hormones do the growing for them. But if you're natural, you need to be smarter because we don't use that stuff, right? So we can't just go in and just throw weights around with a lack of intent. Our stimulus needs to be more precise and high quality driven. So one of the primary variables that we need to focus on is getting stronger in bodybuilding repetition ranges. Okay, so this is called progressive load. I use the term progressive load because the term progressive overload is commonly defined as gradually increasing the training stress placed on the body to continue adaptation. The training stress can come from a myriad of variables: load, volume, frequency, range of motion, and so on. So progressive load is defined as the incremental increase in weight over time while being independent of all other overload variables. Now, if you are able to increase load, then you will have an opportunity to induce greater mechanical tension on the muscles. But this is only true if variables such as body mechanics, tempo, or other subset factors are held constant. If they are not held constant, the added load might not translate to increased tension on the muscle. Instead, it could very well be a decrease in tension. So sloppy progression is not progression. But if you keep things tight and right, there will be an increase in mechanical tension, which again is the primary driver of muscle growth. So load progressions over time should be emphasized as a key strategy to enhance this stimulus and therefore facilitate muscular growth. Listen, dudes, if you're natural and you're not getting stronger, you're not going to grow. This is critical for those who are drug-free. You will never see a weak natural that is also jacked. It doesn't happen. But I'll tell you what I have seen. I've seen a lot of weak bodybuilders on steroids. Natural lifters have to respect strength. Enhanced lifters can cheat the process because the drugs keep them anabolic, allowing them to grow without getting stronger. You don't have this luxury. But as I said, progressive load isn't just about moving weight around, throwing it like a meathead. It's about gradually applying more mechanical tension to your muscles over time, but the caveat, without getting sloppy. If you do this right, you are forcing your muscles to adapt. So the next important variable in the pyramid that can influence muscle growth is intensity of effort. This is relative intensity, not absolute. Intensity can be defined as the momentary effort applied relative to an individual's current ability to produce force during a given set. So this means training intensity is the proximity to true muscular failure. Muscular failure means you physically can't complete another full rep even when you're giving max effort. So I'm going to show you this. So let's say number 6 is failure. Okay, this is an intensity graph. We have reps and we have effort going up. So every repetition you do, let's say you cannot do number 6. That's the failure point. That is intensity, okay? So you go deep into the set until you can't do another clean repetition and you actually fail on number 6. You do number 5, but you try for 6 and you fail. You can't do it. Number 6 cannot be done. And this reaches 100% intensity, okay? So that's kind of how that looks. Guys, intensity is the most underrated variable. And it's probably the reason you're not growing. Well, this and progressive load. Don't think because you you worked out and you felt tired that you trained hard. I mean, you can jog on the treadmill and make yourself tired, but it's not going to stimulate leg growth, right? To trigger a specific stimulus for muscle growth, your working sets have to get uncomfortably close to muscular failure. So you don't have to hit this, but we have to get close. That's where the magic happens. The last few reps, when your form is still clean, but your body wants to shut it down. That's where you get into the stimulatory rep territory. Now listen, I'm not saying the preceding reps, right? I'm not saying those don't contribute to growth. But what I'm saying is the last few reps to failure contribute the most to growth. And this could be all the way up to 15. I know some people will say, well, those reps are so heavy that they have to play a role. But this could be 16, right? This could be rep 16. I'm not saying that rep 1 to 10, 1 to 11 don't contribute at all. So it doesn't matter what this last number is. All I'm saying is the last reps contribute the most. Look at it this way. The only reason you do the former reps is get to the latter reps. That's the reason why you would do these, is to get to the end. You only start to get to the end. So you need to learn how to dig in and make things uncomfortable. Now, there are two reasons why getting close to muscular failure is important. So we're still on intensity, right? There are two reasons. One is motor unit recruitment. And the second one is fiber tension. Now, a motor unit is a single, so we'll start with motor unit first. A motor unit is a single motor neuron, it's a nerve. It connects to a group of muscle fibers, okay? So it's basically like this. It's a nerve. It's a very crude image, but you kind of get the idea. So the nerve connects to fibers. Okay, so this is the motor unit. The whole thing is kind of a motor unit, but it connects to fibers. When that nerve fires, all those fibers contract together. This is known as the all or none principle. So when it fires, everything in here is contracting, okay? It's either on or off. So you have lower threshold motor units. And you have higher threshold motor units. Lower threshold motor units, they are connected to type 1 fibers, which are smaller and built for endurance. And higher threshold motor units, they are connected to type 2 muscle fibers, which are larger and have the greatest capacity for strength and growth. And just for clarity, I'm using type 1 and type 2 as general terms. Type 2 fibers, they do include subtypes, but for this, it doesn't matter. So one of our goals in training, in an actual working set, is to recruit as many motor units as possible. But especially the high threshold motor units, since those motor units are connected to the type 2 fibers that have the greatest capacity for growth. Now, just so you understand how this works, your body is always recruiting motor units to perform muscular contractions. Motor unit recruitment is based on demand. So this means the greater the muscle force requirements, the greater the demand. So it starts with the small, lower threshold motor units and begins to call upon the higher threshold motor units as effort or demand increases. This is called the Henneman size principle. So for example, when you're walking, force requirements are low, which means lower threshold motor units are being recruited. The demand's not high. If you started to jog, more would be recruited. If you then sprinted, even more would be recruited, and you would then tap into the higher threshold motor units. So the demand is very high. So this is comparable to doing a set. The harder the set gets, closer to failure, the more motor units are forced to be recruited. By the time you're close to true muscular failure, almost every motor unit is firing in that given muscle and tapping into those fibers, especially the big high threshold fibers that have the greatest capacity for growth. Now, the research suggests that full motor unit recruitment typically occurs within the last 3 to 5 reps before muscular failure. So, for example, a 5 RM, you're getting full recruitment at rep 1. Okay. If we do an 8 RM, you're getting full recruitment at rep 3, okay? And if you do a 12 RM, it's looking like rep 7, okay? So that's your max, meaning you can't do a 6th repetition, you can't do a 9th, you can't do a 13th. So full recruitment with the 5 is basically at the beginning, right? 8 RM, full recruitment at rep 3. 12 RM, it's at roughly around rep 7. Now, if your only goal is to maximize motor unit recruitment, then this is perfect. In which case, you don't have to train to failure on every set, or you don't even have to get close to failure, right? You just, in a 12 RM, you just go to 7, shut it down. But we have fiber tension to address, okay? We can't forget fiber tension. So as your set goes on and your strength depletes, your reps naturally begin to slow down. And going back to motor unit recruitment, that slowdown is when your body begins firing every motor unit it's got. So again, usually around 3 to 5 reps before muscular failure. But here's the catch, guys. That slowdown is actually part of what makes your muscles grow. When the contraction velocity drops, your muscle fibers produce more force to keep the weight moving. And more force means more mechanical tension on the fibers. Remember that we want full motor unit recruitment. This will activate as many fibers as possible in the given muscle being worked. But we also need those individual fibers that are being recruited to experience high tension, and this is the stimulatory rep zone. Stimulatory rep zone. This is why when reps slow down, you need to keep going instead of stopping. So to keep this simple, as your muscles deplete in strength, your contraction velocity naturally slows down. We've known for decades that the slower a muscle contracts, the higher the force it can produce. And the faster it contracts, the lower the force it can produce. This relationship is called the force-velocity curve. So at higher speeds, there's less time for the tiny actin myosin cross bridges inside each fiber to attach and ratchet. That produces force. So there's less time for that. At higher velocities, force production is less, which means less tension. At slower speeds, those cross bridges have more time to connect. It's slower, and this creates greater force and higher tension on each muscle fiber. So even if your high threshold motor units are already firing and recruiting all of their fibers, the amount of tension those fibers experience still depends on how fast the rep is moving. When reps slow down, especially near failure, the tension on those fibers, it goes up significantly. And that is the reason why those final reps are so powerful for growth. So in very simple terms, the slower your reps are near the end of a set, the more stimulating, the more tension you're creating basically. You have more of a tension stimulus on those fibers. Velocity loss within a set is a key marker of effort. And that lower contraction velocity increases mechanical tension. Granted, if the demand is high and it's proximal to muscular failure. So high motor unit recruitment and high fiber tension, so these two things, they both are high, it comes down to intensity of effort. And when combined with progressive load, they work synergistically to drive growth. As load increases, so you get stronger, intensity of effort will increase by default, driving higher levels of motor unit recruitment and mechanical tension. But of course, you still need to train close to failure to tap into those final stimulatory repetitions. That's what's going to trigger maximal growth. And as your muscle fibers grow thicker, they add more contractile elements, your strength potential increases. So this allows you to handle heavier loads. So this is what creates this continuous cycle of adaptation. This is why they are synergistic, but really symbiotic with each other. So progressive load and intensity are the two most important variables for a natural lifter, period, end of story. All right, so we have the third part of the pyramid. We have some of it filled out, so we gotta fill out the rest. And that would be volume and frequency. Let's start with volume. Volume is defined as how many working sets you do per muscle group per week. That's how we've all been categorizing it. And this is where most dudes mess it all up. They feel like if they're not growing, the answer is just do more. More sets, more pumps, more of everything. I mean, that's what everyone preaches, right? The drug users, the pros, the evidence-based crowd. I mean, they all spit the same recycled diatribes. More volume equals more growth. There's also lots of fitness influencers you're seeing online who are pushing higher volumes, many of who are using all sorts of drugs that honestly most of us can't even pronounce. I'm not going to name any names, but you all know who exactly they are, who I'm talking about. Volume is the most abused variable, and it can literally wreck naturals. For a natural lifter, your recovery is limited. It's finite. Every set is a resource. You cannot afford to waste it. Now, there are some studies that show a dose-response trend, and the conclusion is that more sets equals more growth. But there's also other research showing that fewer, harder sets can build just as much muscle. But here's the thing with these high-volume studies, guys. They have issues. Things like rushing through reps and sets, poor exercise selections, and honestly, I question if the subjects are even reaching true limit failure. They all say it, but I question it. I mean, here's the deal. I don't think they are, to be honest with you. They say they reach failure. They say that in their research. But in a lot of these studies, based on the program design, I don't know, man. I bet my left nut that they are not taking subjects to true muscular failure, even though they say that they do. And based on how some of these guys train themselves from the videos that they've uploaded, that we've all seen, I mean, I'm not convinced they know what true limit failure actually is. So there's that. Besides that, there are many variables that can mess with the conclusive results. And many times, they are not applicable to the real world of training. Listen, bros, if sets aren't taken to true proximal failure, if repetitions are performed too fast, if technique is sloppy, or if exercise selection is inferior, the muscles don't experience high quality mechanical tension. Remember, everything comes back to mechanical tension. Everything. We are reverse engineering this. So even if studies say high volume sessions outperforms lower volume sessions, I don't buy it. No sale here. If the design wasn't good and the training itself wasn't effective, the data doesn't prove what they think it does. Now listen, volume has its place. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. But you need to be smart about how much you do. If you're getting stronger, if your intensity of effort is high, if your program design is good, and you have high quality executed sets, which FYI are all the things you need to do as a natural lifter. Look, there's only so many sets you can tolerate, aka recover and adapt from. So all of this points to one thing. Your body can only handle so much work before it stops paying off. At a certain point, doing more sets doesn't lead to more muscle, it just makes it harder to recover from. Again, we want mechanical tension. We need mechanical tension. We prioritize this through progressive loading and intensity of effort. Once those two things are optimized, we then assess what we need for volume. And the amount isn't as high as you might think it is, but it is case by case. Some of you guys might need more and some might need less, depending on things like genetics, sleep, nutrition, training experience. And once you get more advanced, this becomes even more nuanced with individual muscle groups. But the takeaway here is more isn't always better. Find the amount of sets your body can actually recover from and adapt from, and then go from there. All right, so the next thing is frequency. Frequency is defined by how often you train a specific muscle group each week. So the research shows that if your total weekly set volume is the same, if it's equated, how you split it up doesn't really matter for growth. Once or twice a week appears to work equally well. But that said, training too often, especially with high intensity, can lead to fatigue, poor performance, or overtraining. Listen, guys, muscle growth, it happens after the recovery period, right? So if we go back to that graph I showed you, so remember, stimulus, we dig a hole, okay? So right here is basically your recovery, because you have to recover back to baseline. And then overcompensation right there is what you want. That's muscle growth, that's adaptation. Okay, so you need to recover back to baseline and then adapt. It doesn't build during the workout itself. Okay, I'm sure everybody knows this. We stimulate, and that's the workout, but you have to allow time to compensate back to baseline and overcompensate. That's where adaptation is. So we need between 2 to 7 days for a muscle to recover and adapt before hitting it again. But this recovery timeline depends on things like your training experience, volume, effort, sleep, stress, and even hormones. Yes, we need a frequent enough stimulus to keep growth signals active. But frequency is always balanced with volume. The total amount of working sets you do, right? So frequency and volume, and it seems not a lot of people know this, but I wrote about this in my first book in 2015. It's a textbook, and I had a graph in there, and I actually never even heard of this. I just came up with this myself at the time. I've heard it now, but this is not very common. There's an inverse relationship between volume and frequency. Okay. That's pretty much, so we'll have intensity, and we'll have, I'm sorry, not intensity. There are relationships with that too, but we have volume, frequency. So when one goes up, the other has to come down. That's just how it works. For example, if you blast your chest with 15 sets on Monday, right? You'll probably need a full week before you can train it again. So we're down here, 7 days. So that's the inverse relationship. But if you only do 5 sets, you might be able to hit it again in about 3 days. So maybe 5, right? Maybe 3. So basically, when one goes up, other comes down. If you have higher volume, you got to push out frequency. When you have higher frequency, you got to keep volume lower. So if you train a muscle group, do full body 3 times a week, you got to reduce that volume per muscle group so you can spread that volume across the week, right? So there's an inverse relationship between volume and frequency. It's not about training more. It's about training smart. You have to give your muscles enough time to recover and adapt, aka grow. So this is important, this inverse relationship, because re-stimulating the muscle tissue too soon can hinder the recovery adaptation process and halt progression, especially if volume demands are exceedingly high. So this means that volume and frequency must always be balanced, right? So if you hit that 15 set chest day on Monday, it's probably not a good idea to hit it Wednesday, right? So you have to be smart about your frequency, and that's largely determined It's predicated on volume. Okay, so the last part of the pyramid secondary variables. So this is like tempo, range of motion, exercise selection, rest periods, things like that. These are micro variables, okay? These are macro variables. So for the scope of this presentation, we're just focused on the macro variables here. Most research on muscle growth doesn't separate natural lifters from those using performance-enhancing drugs, even though their bodies respond very differently. Exogenous drugs like anabolic steroids, peptides, and even TRT, they drastically enhance recovery, boost muscle protein synthesis, and allow the body to tolerate far higher training volumes. Because of that, enhanced lifters can get away with murder, less structure, and lower intensities since their hormones, they're doing a lot of the work for them. But for natural lifters, everything has to come from the training itself. That and nutrition, of course. We can't rely on drugs to recover, build, or maintain muscle. That means your program design has to be sharper and more intentional. Again, the most important factor here is mechanical tension. The force placed on muscle fibers when they contract under load. So, the question is, how do we, the natural drug-free lifter, apply mechanical tension to maximize hypertrophy? Of course, I explained all of it already, but we will summarize everything. So the first thing is consistent load progression, right? Consistent load progression. The next one is training effort. High training effort. Next one is appropriate set volume. This doesn't mean high amounts. It means the appropriate set volume for you, and it's usually not that high. So the last one is recovery. Sufficient recovery between sessions. To maximize muscle hypertrophy when drug-free, training should center around progressive load, which forms the foundation of mechanical tension. So working within a 6 to 30 repetition range is ideal for load progression, but when plateaus occur, simply adding more reps at the same load can continue to drive further growth. So load progression, critical. Effort. Training close to muscular failure is essential as it maximizes full motor unit recruitment, but also naturally slows contraction velocity, which increases muscle fiber tension. But even though rep speed slows unintentionally as you approach near failure, so this is important, even though it does slow, every repetition, both concentric and eccentric, so positive and negative, it should still be performed under controlled, non-ballistic conditions to keep tension high. So don't throw it around. Don't CrossFit your reps or don't IFBB Pro your reps, okay? Keep it controlled. And then we have set volume. This should support mechanical tension, right? Set volume should always support mechanical tension, sorry. So the primary drivers are these right here, but this just supports it. So this primary driver of mechanical tension, and then you tack on volume to support what you need. Set volume should support it, not overshadow, right? So my recommendation is to start around 5 hard sets per muscle group per week and adjust up or down based on recovery and progression. And I know people are losing their freaking minds, like, that's it? Five sets per week per muscle group? Yeah, dog, do it. You know, if you're training hard, if you're getting stronger, you can be surprised what you can do with 5 sets. You might need a little bit more. It depends on the muscle groups, okay? So next is recovery. So we have frequency, right? So muscle groups generally need at least 48 hours before being re-stimulated, but it also might require up to 7 days. So this is dependent on a host of factors, but really it comes down to your individual recovery adaptation ability, all right? I will leave you guys with this. If strength and effort were not essential for muscle growth and volume was the primary driver, like many people think it is, there would be way more naturally well-developed muscular physiques than what we see in the gyms. Because volume is just entirely abused. And we don't see that. As natural drug-free lifters, we need to shift the focus from volume to progressive load and effort. This way, we can train in a way that truly matches our physiology and maximizes long-term growth. Progressive load and intensity of effort, they work synergistically, creating the most reliable pathway to mechanical tension and building muscle naturally. All right, so thanks for watching, guys. If you want to see how I apply all of this in real programs, I use what I call the synergy tension model. So check the link in the description. You'll get the full access to the ST model classroom completely free inside my school community. Let's go, bro.